wave your grades at the brave who fight for you. If you don't gain, they fight in vain. Show them what you can do. Show them what you can do. Please show them what you can do. I said it.
Hello, welcome to Wave Your Grades. As you all know, this is an awesome program. Our host, Mr. Carl Boyd, he will be joining us in just a few moments. And I know that one of the things that we all want to talk about today is one of our dear friends and youth development professionals in Kansas City with younger people, babies and then older people, Mr. Dwayne Crompton. He transitioned I believe May 29th. And Mr. Boyd, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, because when we have people that have done so much for our communities, like Mr. Dwayne Crompton, who, as they pass on, we want to make sure that we're definitely recognizing, honoring, and it's kind of understanding the legacy that they put in place, and that we want to try to do our best to continue on with it. And being a youth development professional, I worked with Mr. Crompton with Freedom Schools, and definitely knew all the great work he did with KCMC for years and years. And a lot of your kids and our students were probably a part of that, because he was there. Can't see you doing that forever. Hey, Mr. Boyd, how are you today?
Fantastic, but I'll get better. That is generally the response that I offer, even as we must recognize that all things are not positive, but all things are promising.
That's right. And
as I was coming on, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was just sharing that, one of our good friends and definitely leaders in our community, Mr. Dwayne Crompton, transitioned, and we want to make sure that we just take some time today to think about all the wonderful things that Mr. Crompton did in the area of youth development, especially, but also, just as a mover and shaker and connecting people and everyone. If you know Freedom Schools, you know that Freedom Schools is one of the pieces that Mr. Crompton in the Mount Pleasant Education Development Corporation, put together years ago with Kauffman Foundation. And many of our students, they're in college now, we're Freedom Schoolers. And so much to talk about. So I'm going to put that there. And then Mr. Boyd, talk with us more. And I know Mr. Crompton.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, as we were discussing even before we came on, of course, during the week, I just thought I would, Eric Wesson talked about it on his program on another network earlier today, but the headline reads, Memorial Services for Dwayne Crompton will be held on Saturday, June 18th at the St. James United Methodist Church, located at 5540 Wayne at 11 a.m. Then I also highlighted his saying he was a genuinely good person, which is certainly true. And Crompton served educational communities around the country for over 50 years as the mastermind behind the Head Start programs in Kansas City Freedom Schools. Now, certainly there was much more, and he was kind enough to allow me to serve on the board of the Freedom Schools at Mount Pleasant, at L. Henderson Bell's church. And I was making the remarks that if you knew Dwayne Crompton, you knew a person who was very serious about what he was doing. You knew a person who had no reluctance to let you know exactly how he felt about whatever he was feeling.
Yes.
But if you did not get an opportunity to know Dwayne Crompton, the person, you might not know how personally helpful he was to many, many people at a more passionate than professional level. And we just have to thank him for that. So at one time, he lived next door to my wife Wanda's parents, and got to know him at another level as a neighbor. But his influence has been deep and continuous. So please go ahead with what you were saying and or were about to say.
No, you're great. Thank you. I remember working with Mr. Crompton, especially with the Freedom Schools, when probably 2008, 9, something like that. So I was able to serve as the attorney, at Mount Pleasant, where he was. So my church is Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church. So of course, my pastor emeritus, and then my pastor Charles Bond is our pastor now. So I've been at Mount Pleasant for a very long time, and doing that, of course, was able to see the brilliance, the wisdom,
yes,
the strategicness, the really understanding, not just about youth development, but about developing people that Mr. Crompton had, because he was the person that I worked under mostly, even especially as I'm assisting with the Mount Pleasant EDC, and then helping here and there with the Freedom Schools, doing things, writing white papers, stuff like that, different things that he allowed me, engaged and allowed me to do to help to move his vision. He was really a visionary. And when you think about Freedom School, yeah. It was just brilliant and was always sharp, always there, and an understanding, what needed to be done to move these young people forward. I mean, hundreds of them. I mean, all this. Anyway, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Please.
No, I was going to say, I'm sure you agree with me when I say, Louis George Walker, please jump in at any time.
Yes.
But one of the things that has been interesting is having the opportunity to actually get acquainted with Marian Wright Edelman, the Children's Defense Fund. And I had the occasion to mention that there are many people who felt that Dwayne Crompton's credibility was significantly enhanced because of his relationship with Marian Wright Edelman. I think those same people would agree that Marian Wright Edelman's credibility was significantly enhanced because she knew Dwayne Crompton. And where that movement was concerned, you mentioned something that is very important to me from the standpoint of what Attorney Valencia Broadus does. And that is, I was just getting ready to say, Children's Defense Fund, the Head Start movement back to the 60s. And then it occurred to me that one of Dwayne Crompton's singular attributes was his ability to really listen to someone your age without being so ego invested that he couldn't take your advice.
Yes. He believed in selecting the people around him that knew what they were doing. Because that's what you do. That's what I heard you to do. So you just do it and tell me and show me. And so interesting, he was really good at that.
Well, you see, and it's one of the kinds of things that I learned from people like Dwayne Crompton. And that is to respect you for the person you are. But here's what we say often, Louis George Walker will agree that this is something repetitive, and that is young people learn more by example than they do by instruction. And by his example, adhering to your example, albeit you younger than he, because it was helping a cause. And Attorney Valencia brought us, you and I know in no uncertain terms that if he thought that something that you had to say was counterproductive or wasteful, Dwayne Crompton had no problem in dismissing you summarily.
Zero problem. With a quickness. That's funny. Yes.
With a quickness.
Yes, absolutely.
And as we think about that, we were talking about the Children's Defense Fund, Freedom Schools, and Head Start, community development. Ooh, you know what? I mean, he has had an impact in many ways. Where does Attorney Valencia brought us on June 3rd, 2022, or June 4th today, isn't it?
Yeah.
June 4th, 2022. Think we are in terms of our quest to educate our children both in the how and in the substance.
So I think that one of the things, and I'm going to do this on purpose, when I think about freedom schools, for example, the quest to make sure that our children could read. That was a big piece of what Freedom School did.
Yes.
And it's something that because he did Head Start, he really understood that. And so even as he, closed out KCMC, Child Development Corporation, then was also then doing Freedom Schools, he still brought that reading, that imperativeness of that to what was happening in Freedom Schools. And not just for the younger kids, but then, of course, the older kids that he brought in, the college students, again, creating jobs and opportunities and mentoring and networking for, if you think about the college students, bringing those kids in to make sure that they understood how important literacy was to the younger people. And if you can imagine, like with any of us, the more that we tutor somebody or read to somebody or mentor someone, it really strengthens us too, because it's iron sharpens iron. So when you think about how he was doing that tier level educational enhancement, it was so critical. And so now that we don't have freedom schools per se, even though it was the summer piece, even though we don't have freedom schools per se, think about the reading, the tier level mentoring that really worked. It made freedom schools strong. When you go anywhere, all kids remember, I was at freedom school. You were at freedom school? It's like its own fraternity sorority. You were at freedom school. I was at freedom school.
Yes.
My grandson, Alante, he attended, freedom school for a year because I think I'd been there at Mount Pleasant a couple of years, but he attended. So we'll remember that. And it was fun, but they were learning through osmosis, through the songs and, all that. They were learning, having fun, and building confidence. So seeing also looking at Freedom School and that model of what they were doing of, intellectual enhancement, but also social and all that. We don't have that in our schools.
Right.
So that's really, so saying, okay, where we were, where we are now, where we're going to go, there's this big piece on social emotional learning that's happening, making sure that they're getting the social skills piece of learning to be empathetic and all those things in the schools. And I'm learning about it so much because I'm an educational psychology in my PhD program at KU. So the more that I study these things about social emotional learning and trying to get that into the classroom, our teachers are saying, can't we make sure that they can read, write, and do arithmetic, going back to those basics. But unfortunately, the substantive content, going back to reading first, is starting to slip as everyone's focusing on the social, emotional, make sure that they can get along and communicate things that they should be learning at home. And I know I'm all over the board with this, but so it's like, how do we, so social emotional learning is important. And they're trying to make it part of the curriculum of schools, just to make sure that the kids can talk to each other and behave and all of that. But now, and they're doing that and risking taking away those critical skills that kids need. Again, reading, writing, grammar, all of that. So that's what as I studied, and we have to do a lot of research on it. And I've just been amazed, like, really, we're doing that? I mean, I guess you should know it, but I didn't know, but I know for real because of all the research, things we have to read at school. So then where do we go from here? I think we need not just more freedom schools again, we need more people to understand that these kids have to be able to read. They have to be able to read, because if they can't read, it's going to be hard for them to be able to then understand how to do logic for math and everything else. They have to be able to read and comprehend and do critical thinking. I don't care how personable you are, great personality, if you can't do some of those basic critical R's.
Yeah.
So as I'm studying more, it brings me more questions to myself of like, wow, what are we going to do?
You make me mindful of a few things. Let me remind those who are with us that it is Wave Your Grades. This is KUAW.org. And this program honors our military by introducing students who excel. Now, during these summer vacation months, we get an opportunity to reflect on the importance of school, looking forward to their leadership in the future, about which our very special guest hostess every first Saturday, Attorney Valencia Broadus, will apprise us. But this is indeed Wave Your Grades. This morning, June 4th, 2022, we are taking some time to pay tribute to Dr. Dwayne Crompton, whose name is synonymous with education in the Kansas City community and obviously beyond. And I will offer an example in a moment, but let me say, Sister Broadus, that before coming on this afternoon, had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. And we were talking about the fact that he made presentations at Mount Pleasant in Dwayne Crompton's behalf. And while we did not talk about this specifically, you make me mindful of it. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu obviously wrote many books, but his first two, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, and then books 1 and 2. And I think it was book 2, where Jawanza Kunjufu did indeed write about fourth grade syndrome and how that impacts particularly young Black males, but young children. And one of the things that was undeniable, no doubt about it, Sister Valencia Broadus, I'm glad you mentioned this, Dwayne Crompton was extremely knowledgeable, but also serious about the imperative that our children learn to read at a young age. And he did not use it as a slogan. This is the basis for all of the rest of that. And I'll tell you one of the things that many people who are not familiar with the climate would needed to have a visit to really embrace was the climate at Freedom School. The opening of Freedom Schools, the interaction. And I was presenting in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I was getting ready that morning to simply make my presentation, get ready for a seminar. And a young lady ran up and she just grabbed me and she was so happy to see me. And I have to admit that I did not quite remember where it was, even though I recognized her face, I couldn't place. But then she started a freedom school opening, and she was impassioned about it. And she talked about both Kansas City, Missouri, and Knoxville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like homecoming, it was like reunion. So it was not just content, it was also climate. So anybody who had that experience at Mount Pleasant will never forget that.
Right. Or the 12 schools that we also had
Come
the
on.
Freedom School affiliates in. And so you mentioned Knoxville, Tennessee, and people may not understand what's in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Come on.
And so,
Yeah.
because I know you said that she mentioned that student, that's where they go and do their training.
Let me tell you
I've never been there, but I've heard about it. So you tell me whatever you know. I've never been there.
Well, let me just say this. And by the way, mention the name of Cherie Holmes Leverett, whom you know, I think, Charles Hasley's niece. But at any rate, it was through Cherie Holmes Leverett and Dwayne Crompton that I had the opportunity to go a couple of times during the summer. And this is what I was talking about when I said young people learn more by example than they do by instruction. These young college students, these young mentors, these young recent graduates did not just talk about content and mechanics, but it was absolutely imperative that they show love.
Right.
It was absolutely imperative that the teamwork was apparent for everybody who was involved in the things that were going on. And when young people saw their mentors have that kind of attitude, the young people felt the camaraderie. The young people felt that they were a part of something special. They were a part of a team. And when you have the wherewithal to teach young people with passion and purpose, but also with gentleness, the young people begin to learn and enjoy what learning means.
Absolutely.
So
let me put this here for a
ahead.
second. So I was thinking as you were describing that work climate, we know so many people, and I say young people, so many young people, they have parents or different adults they know who don't like to go to work, meaning it's not that they don't like to go to work, they may not like their job. So
right.
different piece. And so when you have young people growing up with their parents, did they go to work to make the money? But oh gosh, I don't like my job. Got to go see this person. They get on my nerve. You know how it is, certain places or whatever. But then, so those young people, they can grow up with a interesting perception that work is a place to tolerate, So as you were describing the freedom schools, of course, and the culture, and you're right, it's awesome. And they learn about teamwork, project management. They learn about appearance, attendance, attitude, appreciation, all these wonderful things. They learn to bring their A game is really what they were always taught to do. And so as you're helping, because they're college students who are the teachers. And so at Freedom School, I always just reminded that these young people, they're learning to be really great workers because eventually they're going to graduate from college. If we haven't taught them to be a good worker, have good work ethic, and to be pleasant and help one another at work, then they're going to go to these jobs and they won't have that skill. And so talk about work-based mentoring at its finest. That's really what I was thinking about. Ooh. And then they poured it on to them other young people, just showing, hey, I love to come to work. I like to be here, and then the kids will say, well, hey, what are you studying? So that those little younger kids were getting some college career readiness early on. I mean, it was a chain of just these impacts when you break that down. So
well, now as you were asking me about Knoxville and having had the opportunity to be there, now I ask you about the climate being a part of the atmosphere at Mount Pleasant and the degree to which the church was supportive of those things that were going on of that nature?
Excellent. So one of the things that I remember the most, we always did the fundraisers, and people may not know, I'm Sigma Gamma Rho. And so the young lady that led it for many, many years, I can't think of her name at this moment, but I think she was there when they first started it, and she's passed now. They had a scholarship in her name. But I just remember being there, and so they would have fundraisers all the time. The parents would come, the church would come, because even though Kaufman did the funding, I mean, we loved it. And, they would do the bake sales and just everything, because you always had all these young people around, whether it was, Wednesdays and during the day. The church loved it, supported it, but every church, the freedom schools were mostly in churches. So we had a couple in Kansas, of course, St. James was one of the sites. And so there was all these different churches had these freedom schools. And you can imagine these families, church or unchurched, meaning of the kids, they had this built-in support system, the social capital that would follow them, as I'm sure it has, on and on and on. Those kids, wherever they are, that were in freedom school, whether they were a child attending it or a teacher, they can always go back to that space where they met those people, if, to have a network to kind of build on in some way of, hey, I'm back home from school, and you go visit, and sometimes it was their church, meaning where the students worked. It could have been their church, that they came back and worked. But in general, your question is supportiveness. Yes, we were supportive. Absolutely. We loved it. We did the walkathons with them at Mount Pleasant. I remember we had this walk, and we walked, and it was great. Had on the t-shirts and all that, because it was great. It was the village. It was the village in action. And what you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that meant for the parents that it was equally important for the parents to understand the importance of reading as it was for the child. And it was participatory learning, and that carried over into the home.
Yes.
But as it relates to a style of mentoring and teaching, it's a rhetorical question. I know that you have heard it before, and it's kind of like, how many times did you hear Dwayne Crompton use an expression like, no, I'm not going to do that? That is what you are assigned to do. And putting it in context, what I'm saying is, all of us who ever met with Dwayne Crompton, whatever the subject area we were treating, we knew he knows how to do this. And in as much as he is the leader, then we expect him to do it. And Dwayne Crompton would let you know, no, that's why you're here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was the way of helping. Well, one thing I do believe, and my daughter talked about this on different things with work and in training young people, is when you own a business, so whether it's a for-profit or not-for-profit, when you own a business, you really do need to understand every intricacy of operating every system in your business.
Sure.
You have to know it, hands down 100%. You have to have ideas, because that way, then when you bring people in, you don't know if they're messing up unless you have an understanding of what's supposed to be happening. Okay, so Dwayne Crompton, Mr. Crompton, he understood the intricacies of everything that's supposed to be happening. So he was one of those walking principles, so to speak. He'd walk around and just check in, but if something was or was not right, and then yes, he's expected you to do it, because that is what you're here for. But he understood what needed to be done. And so therefore, he was always the wealth of information you could go back to and at least say, well, if I'm not doing it right, can you give me a little bit of guidance? And he might say, did you read it? Or, he may have another response for you. But the point was, but he knew, and he knew where to send you to. Well, go read this or go do that, and then come back and tell me what you think. Because he wasn't just going to just give you the answers, because he was about making you use your critical thinking skills. That was an expectation that we should have anyway.
Exactly.
But he was really great at that, because if not, then we are not building our young people, meaning the teachers, to be the best they can be. If we're not pushing them pushing them to stretch and think and be creative and plan. And you don't know how to do Harambe that way? Well, you better do something because it's time. He's not coming in to do it for you. You better figure something.
Without a doubt.
Ask your teammate, all that stuff.
Brother Walker, I saw you look up. I thought you were getting ready to say something there.
No, I was posting so that to let the viewers know that they can post their comments about Mr. Crompton, and they will show up on the screen.
Oh.
So those I've been seeing some hearts go by, and people are listening to what you say.
Yeah.
I wanted them to know if they post a comment now, it'll be on the screen and be part of this video from now on. So feel free, wherever you are, if you're watching on Facebook or any of the channels, to go ahead and post your comments.
Please. Thank you so very, very much, Brother Walker. Sister Broadus, you make me mindful of being at a conference where there was a presenter whose door was open and as I was walking by. So I cannot properly attribute to whom because I didn't know a name, I was just walking by. But this person at this time was talking about 4 ways of teaching and learning. And the gentleman was saying at the time that those 4 ways are: 1, when the teacher knows that she's teaching and the learner knows that he's learning. The second way is when the teacher knows he's teaching, but the learner doesn't know she's learning. The third way is when the teacher doesn't know she's teaching, and the learner does know that he's learning. But the fourth way is when the teacher doesn't know he's teaching, and the learner doesn't know she's learning. So oftentimes, there are things being taught that we don't even understand that we understand because it was being taught. And I say with this circuitous route to get around to how many people do we think were impacted by Dwayne Crompton's leadership and learned things that we embraced and used and do not attribute from our being in his presence?
So you have to go back to, so let's just stop Freedom School for a minute,
Come on.
have to go back to KCMC because when I came, KCMC was here. So we have to go back there to KCMC. And so, and again, there were many, many sites, of, KCMC, Child Community Development Centers. So
Sure.
think about not just those kids. So let's just say if there was 10 sites, 50 kids in each site, let's just say that, 10 kids, that's 500 kids. So let's just say, of course, all the kids had, some parents. So 50 times 2, that's,
Thank you.
And so you think, so another couple hundred people. But then let's then also say that all the employees. So if we're saying, 500, then 1,000, and then in all those sites, not only were there teachers, there were staff, there were maintenance people, because Mr. Crompton,
Yes.
he was a walker. That's important to remember. He would go to the sites, he would walk them, check on people, but he also taught his managers to do the same. So he would go, there were accountants, there's just all these people. So let's just say years of that. So if you have, the reason I'm doing that,
Yeah,
I'm talking about, tens of thousands of people.
That's right.
Not 100 here. A lot of people. And that's just here in Kansas City. So let's just say KCMC year. And then so let's just say, okay, we're going to say, 3,000 people a year or whatever for KCMC. And then you do that. Then you go to, of course, Freedom Schools. Again, there are multiple sites. And he, often would hold meetings with the leaders of the churches. And so all the churches, anyway, 100,000 people. I'm just saying there was so many people, hundreds of thousands of people. And then, of course, whenever he would go to, to Knoxville, to not just him be there, but other freedom schools and meet all those people and all those. And then of course he would go, he would, testify in Congress. I mean, there's so many things he would do, just touching so many people that.
And you see that I often think that Kansas City, Missouri is singularly blessed because in the Freedom School movement, there were municipalities throughout the United States of America who wished to do precisely that kind of thing. And keep in mind, as a matter of fact, Valencia Broadus can do this better than I. When I put it within the context of the revival of the Freedom School Freedom School movement.
Yes.
And that revival took place at a time when, unfortunately, there were some things happening in education that were not at the level of professionalism reflected in the way Dwayne Crompton even carried himself. Sister Broadus, while you are as young as you are, let me just suggest that there was a moment when a determination seemed to be made that we needed to help children feel good. And I think you alluded to something like this earlier, where rigor and standards were sometimes relaxed because we wanted to make sure that children felt good about themselves, where the way that he carried himself suggested that Dwayne Crompton was saying, the more you know, the better you learn, the better you will feel about yourself.
Right. That puts in the confidence in the young people.
Thank you.
That does it. But having the other adults with that same spirit of excellence around you all the time. And so it's everyone is learning, they're growing. That, when you put the expectations out there, kids, me, you, we'll rise to the level if expectation is clear and you're like, you're gonna rise to it. And if not, then you can't be here. I mean, there's just some things that you do, but as they reach that, their confidence levels just skyrocket because they know what they know. I mean, it's like, I know what I know. I mean, I don't know what you know, but I know what I know. So it's a different thing. And so you have that, you have the real learning happening, the reading, I mean, just the culture of just Harambe and all of that about being a person of color and having, strength and elegance in my culture, pouring that into the young people too, because a lot of young people way back then, and then Freedom School Revival, and even now, we don't even know who we are. And we don't. Yes, go ahead, please.
No, please. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No. I mean, we don't know what we belong to. And again, this came out in a class that I was doing because I teach teachers at KU. So part of my program is I teach teachers, how to teach, not just urban schools, but in general. So we talk about identity. How do you help kids to understand their identity? So we give these vignettes, these scenarios, and within them, we talk a lot about what do you do if you're in a class where there, and one of them was you're in a class and the professor, he puts a map on the wall and he asked all the students to identify where your family comes from. Not a US map, a full map.
Yes.
And then the vignette goes on and says a young Black girl, she refuses to participate. And then the teacher asks her, well, what's wrong? Why don't you participate? And she says, I don't know where I come from. Mm-hmm. And she starts crying. This was a whole vignette because that goes back to social, emotional learning and cultural competence. So how do we teach these teachers to address this? Well, when I talked about it with my students, we were just talking about, did the teacher do something wrong and putting the map up, all that type of stuff, And I'm like, well, he didn't do anything wrong, but because it happened, what do we do now? Because obviously this child is having an identity crisis. He doesn't want to participate. And every time that you do this normal activity in classes, because it might happen next year in her 5th, 6th grade or whatever, what are we going to do? So we talked about helping young people to think about African culture, Hispanic culture, wherever they might come from. And then in some way, maybe talking to their parents here or there about having a cultural identity night, only to help us to belong somewhere. Because when we don't, we get lost. And even though it's really just interesting, I'm learning so much in my PhD program. I just want
This is so good. And
great stuff.
I'll tell you what it makes me mindful of. When I was working with educators in the United States and Canada, I had something called Try This Tomorrow. And then I would talk about different things for teachers to try. To give an example very quickly, one of the things I suggested trying was the no cheat test. Now, what is a no cheat test? It is a test upon which no child can possibly cheat, because it goes like this. I will give you whatever that test might be, 1 or 2 pages, I pass it out. I ask the students to answer the questions. Give yourself 5 to 7 minutes. When you find that there are questions you cannot answer, ask one of your classmates. So the first time I did this at Parkside Elementary School on the south side of Chicago, Kenneth Stevens looked at me and said, "Mr. Boyd, did you say we could ask somebody?" I said, "Speak up, Kenneth, that's all right." He said, "Did you say we could ask somebody?" I said, "Sure." So he leaned over and he was getting ready to ask Shelley. And I said, "It's all right if you get up and ask somebody else." Of course, everybody in the class ended up at Shelley's desk because she had all the answers. But that was the idea behind the no cheat test. And I said, I'm going to grade you as if you did it on your own. And what it caused young people to do is to study so they could be the desk that everybody came to. But anyway, it's called the no cheat test. But getting to where you were talking about the map, one of the things I have asked teachers to do is use the WECL method, WECKEL, the WECL method. When I was at Lindblom High School in Chicago, Illinois in 1957, I had a geometry teacher whose name was Mr. WECL. And this is how Mr. WECL answered questions. Now, let's talk about a formula for a particular equation that young people are grappling with. Mr. WECL is at the board and somebody raises their hand and says, "Mr. WECL, I heard we're not supposed to come to school next Wednesday." Now, Valencia Brothers, you are teaching geometry. A student wants to know whether they're supposed to come to school. What does the typical teacher say to that young person?
That is not relevant to this class.
Thank you. Now, let me tell you what the WECL method was. Mr. WECL would say, "You know what? I'm glad you asked me about that. Because if you're wondering, I'll bet somebody else in the class doesn't know what we meant when we said that next Wednesday is a teacher preparation day. So class, please put down your pens and your pencils and your papers. And I want you to know that we take our job so seriously that we have to have teacher preparation days so we're able to do what we need to do for you. Just like these equations that we're doing, let's talk about these equations. Now, one thing he did, he dignified the person who asked the question.
Right.
The second thing was he answered the question. The third thing was anybody in that classroom would now feel like it's all right to ask Mr. WECL because he will never embarrass you in front of your peers.
That's right.
So if I am the teacher and I've got this map and the child is embarrassed, I want this child to know how much I appreciate having the courage to admit that it's something you need the answers to. And let me tell you, young lady, I didn't know either. You're going to be shocked when you find out the pains I went through to find out where my folks came from. And moving on from there, because our responsibility as educators is to make learning comfortable and not such a challenge that people don't want to come to class.
That's right.
And
and when students can't read or write or do the math or whatever it is, they're uncomfortable.
Thank you.
And it is when they want to stay home and or they're being bullied. They don't want to come.
Come on.
Comfortable.
Yes.
And so.
And you see, one of the things that I think about, and I'm really, it is so important that I be honest about this and not just making up some stuff. I cannot recall a setting in which Dwayne Crompton made me feel uncomfortable just because I didn't know as much as he knew. And I promise you, and I'm very serious about this, praise God, I'm telling you in front of God, that there were many times where I felt that I wish I knew as much as he knew about whatever that subject matter was. But he never put me in a situation where I felt embarrassed, never put something on me that I felt I could not do as an assignment. And I think now that I would add to my list, use the Crompton method. Because you knew he knew.
Yeah, you did.
No doubt about it. But he also practiced the type of learning that is participatory learning. He might know, but now I need you to do it. So I loved that in him, and I love being able to keep that with me from now on.
And pass it on, because Freedom School, all those students, that went through Freedom School, they all had that. They had that way that they were taught, that they're learned, and they're not only going to do it with sisters, brothers, whatever, but they're going to do it with their kids. They're going to make sure their kids read. Think about that. All them kids that went, especially if they were teachers, especially, because that was ingrained in them, the importance of it. And even the kids and the parents that were in the program, they're going to do it because it was ingrained in them.
Yes.
And so thinking about how do we had many generations to where education, it was important, but then it really became about connections and just kind of social capital, not education, a little different. The networking, who do you know, just kind of do what you can to get by, and then you just catch the right people, it'll happen for you. Where Mr. Crompton, he did both. And I think sometimes, it is who you know, but then once you get there, if you don't know, then who you know ain't gonna keep you there.
Wow.
Who you know can get you there, but what you know will keep you there. And I think that Mr. Walker, he's laughing, but you know what I mean, Mr. Walker? It's like who you know is important.
Yeah.
It can get you indoors and nobody else can get you in. But once you're there, man, you must perform.
Yes.
If you don't, you're going to definitely disappoint the person who opened the door for you. You disappoint yourself because you may not be there long. And people are they're going to know you were faking. And that's why the fake it till you make it. It sounds cool, but you have to know. You have to know what you know.
Thank you.
And that's what you're reading and the making sure people understood. You're going to learn. You're going to have some dreams. You're going to make some things happen. You're going to write. You're going to do it. You're going to finish your homework. I mean, he was with everybody, not just students, workers, everybody. You have to perform.
Yes.
But you knew it. You knew it going in. I mean, because you knew everybody was saying, now, if you work here, you're going to have to.
Yes, ma'am.
And what's wrong with that? That's what they ask for in corporate America.
Absolutely.
So why don't we expect less because we're working with people of color? Sometimes we expect less, meaning we don't want to do as much as we would for Black employers, but we will do a whole lot. I won't go into that, but you know what I'm talking about. So
Yes, I do.
sometimes,
And
like,
Brother
God,
Walker, did you want to say something to that?
Yeah, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Please talk to us.
You're on mute. You're still on mute. Uh-oh, whatever you said must have been.
There you go.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
You know, it's networking that opens doors, but generally a good networker is not going to open the door if they don't see something in you.
Good point.
Put their reputation on the line. So you don't want to let them down, and they know that you got it in you when they select you. They really see that a good mentor or one of those, you may not know it, but when they usually put you up there, you're supposed to perform.
Thank you very much. After networking, get working.
That's right. And one of the things is, it's interesting. I saw this on the Tamron show or something like this. But there was a gentleman named, there's a man named Luke James, and I don't really know who he is, but she was interviewing him. And what happened with this man named Luke James is he's from, I think, Louisiana, but anyway, he got the opportunity to audition for Tyrese, I think. Anyway, so, but when he got the opportunity, he was ready. He got it. I mean, he got the audition. Then after that, he got the opportunity to meet with Clyde James, the man who, like Whitney Houston, everybody, he was the
producer.
I probably had the name wrong, but he was the big man that helped them all.
Let me spell his name for you. It's Clive. Clive.
Clive. Okay.
Davis.
So
Davis.
So then he got the opportunity just to meet him because there was some opening. He and his brother. And so Mr. Clive Davis said, "So I mean, why should I hire y'all over other people?" And the young man on the show said, "We didn't say anything." He said, "My brother was going to respond," and I said, "No, let's just show them." They got up, they sang right there, and they got it. And then he got the role to play. Anyway, the point was, this man, Luke James, his whole point was, he says luck. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. But you got to be ready all the time. Like Mr. Boyd, if anyone ever says, "Mr. Boyd, you sing a song," Mr. Boyd be like, probably got his box with him and he's ready. But you have to be ready all the time. And that's the Mr. Crompton. I mean, the whole piece of open doors, but you got to be ready to perform right there. So you have to stay ready, stay prepared. And that's what Freedom School really taught, especially those teachers. Thank you. They always had to be prepared for the parents, for whatever was going on. You, the teacher, handle it.
Well, you know how to help us in our conclusion. We're already at the end of the program, and I appreciate you so much. And it really helps us to know that just remembering is not quite enough. But here again, he has networked for all of us.
Yes.
We must be prepared and we must get busy. Brother Walker and Sister Broadus, before we finish, just ask your prayers for my wife's twin brother, Wade Clark, who continues to be in ICU after suffering a stroke. And I always say that my wife is my hero, her strength and her prayers are strong. So I solicit from all that you pray for Wade Clark. And I thank you for helping, even as inadequate as it has to be with only 1 hour, and as much as Valencia Broadus has to say about Dwayne and the teachers you teach and all of that, yet thank you for this tribute this afternoon.
Thank you for Mr. Boyd for, letting us do this. Appreciate it.
Yes. I have my message for the day.
Okay.
Thanking Louis George Walker, thanking Valencia Broadus. To students across the USA, your Students for Boots message for this day, June 4th. Military service is not one victory, but a journey of preserving our nation. School is not just a building, but a symbol for lifelong education. Thank you so very much for joining us on Wave Your Grades. Attorney Valencia Broadus, Smart Club and all. Louis George Walker. My name is Carl Boyd, gracious God and wonderful Wanda. I'm on my way home.
Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you.